Among the quiet majesty of the silverwood forest, a horse gaunt and trembling stood bound to a towering pine, its once proud spirit reduced to a shell of despair. Its chestnut coat, dull and filthy, barely hid the sharp ridges of its ribs. Each labored breath made the rope around its neck bite deeper, its hooves pressed into the frozen ground. The Mustang stood still, too weak to fight, too broken to care. Nearby, Thomas Grayson watched, his face cold as the winter wind. His boots crunched on the frosty earth as he yanked the rope, testing the knot. "You're not worth the feed," he muttered, shaking his head. After a beat, he added under his breath, almost as if to himself, "Not like I've got much left to give anyway." His eyes flicked to the horse, which met his gaze with a hollow, lifeless stare. Whatever fight it had was long gone. At first, he had considered nursing it back to health, but the burden of debts and a failing ranch quickly hardened his resolve. The cost outweighed the effort. The sun dipped behind the jagged peaks, leaving the forest cloaked in growing darkness. Thomas adjusted his coat against the biting cold, glancing at the horizon as the distant howls grew nearer. "They'll take care of you soon enough," he said under his breath. Without a backward glance, he turned and disappeared into the shadowed depths of the forest, leaving the horse alone. The Mustang remained still, its head drooping as the encroaching night brought a deeper chill. The howls of wolves grew louder, sharper, carrying the promise of danger. The horse's legs quivered as it shifted slightly, a weak, sorrowful whinny breaking the silence. It wasn't a plea for rescue. There was no one left to answer. It was an acknowledgement of the inevitable. As night fully claimed the forest, the first wolf appeared, its eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. It moved with eerie grace, soon joined by two others. The pack formed a loose circle, growling low, their hunger evident in every measured step. The Mustang flinched, its nostrils flaring, though it lacked the strength to resist. One wolf crouched, its muscles coiled as it prepared to strike. Then, a sharp whistle cut through the tension, a sound so piercing it startled the wolves and echoed through the trees. The pack froze, their ears swiveling toward the source. Even the Mustang raised its head, its ears twitching for the first time in hours. The whistle came again, followed by the crunch of approaching footsteps. A figure emerged from the shadows, carrying a lantern that cast flickering light across the grim tableau. The wolves snarled, but hesitated, their eyes darting between the figure and the Mustang. As the figure stepped closer, his features came into focus, a wiry old man with a face carved by years of endurance, his sharp eyes glinting with resolve. In one hand, he held a lantern, its light flickering wildly as he swung it in an arc. In the other, he gripped a long, sturdy staff, the end capped with an iron tip. His voice rang out, sharp and commanding, cutting through the frigid air. "Back off!" he roared, his tone carrying the authority of someone who had spent years surviving the unforgiving wild. The wolves paused, their growls rumbling low and guttural, but they didn't retreat. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, calculating and relentless. The man swung the lantern again, its light catching the nearest wolf's face, momentarily blinding it. He jabbed the staff forward, the sharp iron tip slicing the air with a threatening hiss. "I said back off!" he bellowed, his voice rising, underlined with a tone that promised he would fight to the end. One wolf lunged, testing his resolve. The man struck out with the staff, landing a glancing blow to its flank. The animal yelped and scrambled backward, its hesitation rippling through the pack. The old man didn't wait for them to regroup. He stomped his boots hard against the frozen ground, the sharp sound echoing through the trees. "You want to test me? Come on then," he barked, his voice daring and defiant. The wolves exchanged glances, their primal instincts calculating the odds. Hunger gnawed at them, but the man's unwavering stance, the swinging lantern and the biting iron staff, signaled danger. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to retreat, their snarls growing fainter as they melted into the shadows of Silverwood Forest. The man stayed rooted in place, his staff held steady, the lantern swinging in his grip as he scanned the tree line for any sign of their return. Only when he was certain they were gone did he lower his guard, letting out a measured breath. His eyes turned to the trembling Mustang, its body taut with fear but unmoving. "Well now," he muttered, his voice softer, carrying a note of curiosity and guarded empathy. His footsteps crunched against the frosty ground as he approached the horse, the lantern's warm glow casting flickering shadows against the towering pines. What had started as a night of despair now flickered with the faintest glimmer of hope. Thomas Grayson's calloused hand reached for the knife at his belt. The horse flinched, but didn't fight as he carefully sliced through the ropes binding it to the tree. "Whoever left you here didn't plan on you making it," he muttered, his tone softening. "But I've got a feeling you're not done yet." The final strand of rope gave way, and the Mustang crumpled to the ground, its legs folding beneath it as if the weight of survival had finally crushed its strength. Thomas knelt beside the animal, his hand resting on its quivering neck. With surprising resolve for a man of his wiry build, Thomas gathered branches from the forest floor, crafting a makeshift sled. He heaved the Mustang's limp body onto it, the horse offering no resistance, too drained to protest. Hitching the sled to his mule, he began the arduous journey back to his remote cabin, nestled deep in the woods. The Mustang's eyes flickered shut, the rhythmic sound of the mule's hooves lulling it into a restless, fragile slumber. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the specter of death receded, leaving in its wake a glimmer of something unexpected: hope. As dawn broke, golden light filtered through the thick canopy, illuminating the small clearing where Thomas's cabin stood. Its weathered wooden walls seemed to blend seamlessly with the wilderness, a place of quiet endurance. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, the only sign of life in the otherwise untouched landscape. Inside, the Mustang lay on a bed of hay in the corner, its shallow breaths steady but weak. Thomas moved with practiced quiet, his movements careful not to disturb the fragile creature. His rugged hands, weathered by years of solitude and hard labor, worked with steady precision as he prepared a mixture of herbs over the fire. "You're tougher than most," he said, glancing over his shoulder at the Mustang. "Most wouldn't have made it through the night." The sight of the horse, abandoned and left for dead, stirred something deep in him, a fury at the cruelty he'd witnessed too often in his years. Memories of a world beyond Silverwood Forest, marred by greed and neglect, surfaced unbidden, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. The Mustang stirred, its ears twitching at the faint crackle of the fire. Thomas approached slowly, holding a bowl of steaming herbs. The horse flared its nostrils, but didn't resist as he carefully spooned the warm liquid into its mouth. Its eyes fluttered open, locking onto his. In that fleeting exchange, a silent agreement seemed to form. Neither was ready to surrender. Over the following days, Thomas dedicated himself to the horse's recovery. He named it Blaze, inspired by the flicker of life he saw within its weary frame. Each morning, he ventured into the forest, gathering medicinal plants and anything else that might aid in its healing. He cleaned its wounds with steady hands, undeterred by its occasional protests. Slowly, Blaze began to recover. Its coat, once dull and matted, regained a subtle sheen. Its breathing steadied, and a newfound brightness returned to its eyes. Thomas allowed himself a rare smile one evening as he sat beside Blaze. But the danger was far from over. The wolves that had surrounded Blaze before had not disappeared entirely. Their howls pierced the night, echoing through the trees like a haunting melody. Thomas kept his rifle within arm's reach, and a lantern burning through the darkness, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. As another morning dawned, casting warm light over the cabin and the forest beyond, Thomas decided it was time to see if Blaze could stand. Thomas Grayson carefully unwrapped the makeshift bandages from the horse's legs, stepping back with a firm yet calming voice. "All right, Blaze. Show me what you've got." The Mustang's ears twitched at the sound of his words, and it shifted uncertainly, its legs trembling beneath its weight. With a deep, uneven breath, Blaze began to push up, first onto its front legs, then its back. The effort was immense, and the horse wavered, unsteady but upright. Thomas felt his chest tighten, his rugged face breaking into a rare smile. Blaze hesitated before taking a cautious step, then another, each movement slow but deliberate. The sight filled Thomas with a pride he hadn't experienced in years. As he extended his hand, Blaze surprised him by stepping closer, its dark eyes meeting his. For the first time, trust seemed to flicker between them. Over the next several days, Thomas worked tirelessly with Blaze, guiding the horse to graze in the small clearing near the cabin. Blaze's strength grew steadily, the lethargic movements giving way to fluid, confident strides. Thomas marveled at the animal's resilience. Despite everything it had endured, Blaze refused to be broken, but danger still lingered in the shadows. One evening, as Thomas sat by the fire, his old hound, Rusty, let out a low growl. Thomas grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, holding a lantern that cast a wavering light across the clearing. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. His eyes scanned the tree line, and for a fleeting moment, he thought he saw glowing eyes in the darkness. Tightening his grip on the rifle, he muttered, "Not tonight. You're not taking him tonight." Inside, Blaze stood near the window, ears alert to every sound. The horse's body had healed, but its spirit had transformed into something fierce and unyielding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Thomas knew one thing for sure. Blaze wasn't just surviving, he was fighting. Together, they would face whatever Silverwood Forest had in store. As dawn broke, the clearing bathed in soft light. Thomas leaned against the cabin doorway, watching Blaze graze. The Mustang had come so far from the fragile creature he'd found abandoned. Blaze's coat now shimmered in the morning sun, though scars on his legs served as lasting reminders of his ordeal. Despite the progress, unease gnawed at Thomas. The wolves had been eerily silent, their absence unsettling. Grabbing his rifle, Thomas stepped into the clearing. "Time to stretch those legs, boy," he said, his voice breaking the crisp morning stillness. Blaze lifted his head, ears flicking toward the sound. With cautious movements, Thomas fashioned a lead rope from sturdy twine and approached the horse. Though Blaze had grown to trust him more each day, the wild spirit that had kept him alive still flickered in his eyes. "Easy, now," Thomas murmured, looping the rope around Blaze's neck. The Mustang snorted softly, but didn't resist. They ventured into the forest, the towering pines casting long shadows on the needle-covered ground. Blaze walked alongside Thomas, his hooves crunching against the earth. Keeping a steady grip on the rope, Thomas scanned the woods for any sign of movement. "This place is full of dangers," he muttered, more to himself than to Blaze. "But you're stronger now. You'll be ready for whatever comes." As they ventured deeper, Blaze's steps grew confident, his tension easing. Thomas led him to a shallow stream where the horse drank deeply, muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat. Kneeling by the water, Thomas splashed his face with the icy stream, the chill invigorating him. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The forest was serene, the babbling stream and soft bird calls the only sounds. Watching Blaze, Thomas felt a small smile tug at the corners of his mouth. "You're a fighter," he said softly. "Always have been." The peace shattered with the faintest rustle of leaves. Thomas froze, his instincts sharpening. His hand went to the rifle slung over his shoulder as Blaze's head shot up, ears swiveling. The forest, tranquil just moments earlier, felt suffocating with tension. Thomas rose slowly, his eyes scanning the trees. The sound grew louder, closer, until it became unmistakable. The low growl that followed made Thomas's blood run cold. A pair of glowing eyes emerged from the shadows, then another, and another. The wolves had returned. The pack moved into the clearing, their sleek forms gliding through the underbrush. Blaze snorted, muscles taut as he stepped closer to Thomas. The wolves circled, their predatory eyes locked on the Mustang. Thomas tightened his grip on the rifle, his mind racing. The battle wasn't over, not yet. Henry Logan steadied his rifle, his sharp gaze locked on the largest wolf in the pack. "Not today," he muttered, his voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through him. The alpha wolf growled low, its bared teeth glinting menacingly as it crept closer. Henry fired a warning shot into the sky, the echo reverberating through the dense trees of Silverwood Forest. The wolves flinched but held their ground, crouching lower, their bodies tense and ready to spring. Henry understood the odds. There were too many of them, driven by hunger, to take risks no sane predator would. His eyes darted to Blaze, the Mustang pawing nervously at the ground. The horse wasn't just scared, he was poised to fight. As the wolves closed in, Henry made a split-second decision. He dropped the rope and took a step back. "Go, Blaze!" he shouted. For a brief moment, the horse hesitated, then reared up with a powerful cry, his hooves slashing the air. With thunderous strides, Blaze charged at the pack, his ferocity sending shockwaves through the clearing. The wolves yelped and scattered, their snarls turning to cries of retreat as Blaze kicked out with astonishing precision. The alpha wolf lunged, but Blaze sidestepped effortlessly, his movements fluid and exact. Henry watched, awestruck, as the once fragile horse battled with the resolve of a survivor. In moments, the wolves vanished into the shadows, leaving Blaze standing victorious, his flanks heaving and his eyes blazing with triumph. Cautiously, Henry approached, his heart pounding. "You did it, boy," he murmured, his voice heavy with admiration. "You faced them down." Blaze tossed his head as if to say he knew all along he could. Henry chuckled, resting a hand on the horse's neck. "You're something else," he said quietly. As they trekked back to the cabin, the woods felt less foreboding, the sunlight breaking through the trees in golden streaks. Henry felt pride swelling in his chest. Blaze wasn't just a survivor, he was a fighter. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone. The morning air was crisp and tranquil as Henry pushed open the cabin door. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting shifting patterns on the ground. Blaze grazed peacefully in the clearing, his ears swiveling with every faint sound. The wolves were gone, and for the first time in weeks, Henry let his guard down. Yet, a quiet unease lingered in the back of his mind. The forest had its way of testing even the toughest. Slinging the rifle over his shoulder, Henry stretched before heading out to his chores. His days followed a steady rhythm, gathering firewood, checking snares, and foraging for herbs. But Blaze's presence had brought unexpected purpose to his solitude. The Mustang needed him, and in return, Blaze had become an anchor of companionship Henry hadn't realized he'd missed. As he reached the edge of the clearing, something unusual caught his eye. Tracks, large and fresh, unmistakably left by horseshoes. Kneeling, Henry ran his fingers over the deep imprints. A cold unease prickled his spine. "Someone's been here," he muttered, scanning the tree line. Few dared venture this deep into Silverwood Forest without reason, and Henry doubted their intent was good. By midday, Blaze grew restless, his hooves pawing at the dirt, nostrils flared in agitation. Henry noticed the horse's unease and tightened his grip on the rifle. Animals had an uncanny sense for danger. "We'll figure this out," he said softly, moving closer to the Mustang. The sound of approaching hooves shattered the silence, faint at first, but growing louder. Henry stiffened, turning toward the noise. Emerging from the trees were 3 riders, their faces shadowed by wide-brimmed hats and scarves. They moved with confidence, their eyes locking on Blaze. "There he is," the tallest rider said, dismounting with a thud. His boots sank into the earth as he strode forward, his tone heavy with triumph. "Told you he'd be here." Henry stepped between Blaze and the men, his voice firm. "This is private land. You've got no business here." The man smirked, resting a hand on the revolver at his hip. "That horse ain't yours, old man. He's ours. Took off during a storm. We've been tracking him ever since." Henry's jaw tightened. "You left him to die, tied to a tree like he was nothing. That's not how a real owner treats an animal." The man's grin faded, his expression hardening. "Doesn't matter how you found him. He's ours, and we're taking him back." Raising his rifle, Henry aimed at the man's chest. "You're not taking him anywhere." The clearing fell silent, tension crackling in the air. The other 2 riders shifted uneasily, their hands hovering near their weapons. Blaze snorted, stepping closer to Henry, his muscles coiled and ready. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," the leader said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But you're outnumbered. Think you can take all of us?" Henry's grip on the rifle didn't waver. "I don't care how many of you there are. That horse isn't going anywhere." The confrontation dragged on, both sides locked in an unspoken test of wills. Henry Logan's heart hammered in his chest, but his grip on the rifle was as firm as steel. He had stared danger in the face countless times, wolves prowling in the dead of night, violent storms crashing through the wilderness. But this was different. These men weren't just a threat to Blaze. They threatened everything Henry had fought to protect. The tall man leading the group raised a hand to halt his men. His voice was low and ominous as he said, "We'll be back. And next time, we won't ask." With that, the group turned their horses and vanished into the shadows of Silverwood Forest, leaving Henry and Blaze alone in the clearing. Henry exhaled deeply, lowering his rifle, though his thoughts raced. Whoever those men were, they wouldn't give up without a fight, but Henry had no intention of letting Blaze fall into their hands again. That evening, he threw himself into securing the cabin. He fortified every door and window, set traps around the clearing, and kept his rifle within arm's reach. Blaze, ever watchful, stood near the cabin, his sharp gaze fixed on the darkening woods. The Mustang was more than a companion. He was a partner, a testament to survival and strength. Under the pale moonlight, Henry sat by the fire, his mind heavy with the weight of the looming threat. He had faced trials before, but this was a battle for more than just survival. It was a battle for justice. Blaze stood nearby, his proud form bearing the scars of his past, each one a symbol of resilience. "We'll face them together," Henry murmured, his voice steady despite the storm within. "No matter what." The next morning, an eerie stillness hung over the forest. Not even the birds dared to break the silence as Henry stepped out of the cabin, rifle resting on his shoulder. Blaze grazed near the edge of the clearing, his ears twitching at every faint sound. The Mustang's calm posture belied the alertness in his eyes, a silent confirmation that the threat had not passed. Henry spent most of the night preparing for the inevitable return of those men. Years of living off the land had taught him how to defend his own, and he wasn't about to let a group of hired thugs take Blaze without a fight. He walked the perimeter, checking each trap, his movements deliberate and precise. The memory of the men's cold, calculating eyes lingered, their words playing on repeat in his mind. They saw Blaze as nothing more than a tool, a prize to claim, and Henry knew they'd stop at nothing. By midday, the quiet was shattered by the thunder of hooves. Henry's pulse quickened as he grabbed his rifle and stepped outside. 4 riders emerged from the forest's edge, their horses snorting and stamping. At their head was the same tall man, his smirk cruel as he dismounted. "Told you we'd be back," he called, his voice cutting through the clearing. Henry didn't flinch. He raised his rifle and met the man's gaze with unwavering determination. "I don't take kindly to trespassers," he said evenly. The leader chuckled, shaking his head. "You're outnumbered, old man. 4 of us. 1 of you. Be smart. Hand over the horse, and we'll leave you breathing." Blaze snorted, pawing the ground as if challenging the man himself. Henry's voice hardened. "This horse isn't yours. You left him to die. That makes him mine now." The leader's grin vanished, replaced by a glare as cold as the forest wind. "You've got nerve, but nerve won't save you." Tension snapped like a coiled spring. One of the men reached for his pistol, but Henry's warning shot cracked through the clearing before he could aim. The sharp report sent birds fleeing from the treetops and spooked the horses, who shifted uneasily. "Step closer, and you'll regret it," Henry said, his voice low and calm. The leader raised his hand to calm his men, though his tone turned mocking. "You really think you can take us all? You're just one man." Henry smirked faintly. "One man who knows these woods better than you ever will." As if on cue, a hidden trap snapped shut, catching one of the horses by the leg. The startled animal reared, throwing its rider to the ground. Cursing, the man scrambled to free his mount, while Henry took the opportunity to retreat toward the cabin, rifle still trained on the intruders. "Leave now, or no one else walks away unscathed," Henry warned. The leader's face twisted with rage. "Get him and the damn horse," he barked. Chaos erupted. One man charged Blaze with a lasso, but the Mustang reared back, his hooves slashing the air. Henry fired again, grazing the attacker's shoulder. The man stumbled back with a cry, clutching his arm as his horse bolted. Blaze, driven by instinct and defiance, lunged at another rider, his powerful strides shaking the ground. The man panicked, his horse buckling beneath him as he retreated. In the confusion, Henry took aim at the leader, who had begun backing toward the forest. Their eyes locked, and for a brief moment, Henry saw uncertainty flicker in the man's gaze. "This isn't over," the leader growled, before turning his horse and vanishing into the trees. The rest followed, their retreat clumsy and disorganized. Henry lowered the rifle, his breath heavy. Beside him, Blaze stood tall, his defiance as fierce as ever. Together, they had held the line, but Henry knew the fight was far from over. As the dust began to settle, Henry Logan lowered his rifle, his breath coming in heavy bursts as the adrenaline coursed through his veins. Blaze stood proudly in the center of the clearing, his flanks rising and falling with exertion, his eyes blazing with triumph. The Mustang's fierce defiance had been the turning point, sending the attackers fleeing into the depths of the forest. Pride swelled in Henry as he approached the horse with measured steps, his voice calm and steady. "You did well, boy. Real well." Blaze snorted, tossing his head high as though he'd always known the outcome. Henry chuckled, patting the Mustang's muscular neck. "This isn't over yet," he murmured. "They'll be back, but so will we, ready as ever." As the sun sank behind the Silverwood forest, casting the clearing in a warm, golden glow, Henry set about fortifying his defenses. He and Blaze had proven themselves capable of holding their ground, a team bonded by resilience, determination, and the will to survive. The forest grew darker with each passing moment, long shadows stretching across the clearing as Henry paced near the cabin, rifle in hand. His thoughts lingered on the men who had retreated earlier, their anger, no doubt, festering. He knew they wouldn't let this defeat stand. Men like them never did. Blaze stood nearby, his ears swiveling at every faint sound, his frame taut with tension. This was not the first time the Mustang had faced danger. He had endured wolves, sickness, and cruelty. Now he stood as a guardian, protecting the life he had reclaimed alongside Henry. For a brief moment, Henry allowed himself to feel pride. No matter what came next, they would face it together. As the remaining daylight faded, Henry worked tirelessly, resetting traps around the perimeter, sharpening his knives, and counting every precious bullet. His old hound, Rusty, padded along at his heels, his graying muzzle a testament to years of loyal companionship. By the time darkness enveloped the forest, the cabin had transformed from a simple shelter into a formidable stronghold. The sounds of the forest came alive with the night. An owl hooted in the distance, leaves rustled in the breeze, and then, faintly, the crunch of deliberate footsteps reached Henry's ears. He froze, eyes narrowing as he turned toward the tree line. They had come. The first sign was the glow of lanterns filtering through the trees. 4 riders emerged from the shadows, their formation tight and deliberate. This was no haphazard ambush. Dismounting, their leader, Jackson Wyatt, cut a commanding figure, his wide-brimmed hat casting shadows over his hardened face. His shotgun glinted in the moonlight as he called out, his voice steady but menacing. "We're not leaving without that horse. Last chance, hand him over." Henry stepped out from the cabin, rifle raised. His voice was calm but resolute. "You're wasting your time. This horse isn't going anywhere, least of all with you." Jackson smirked, his grip tightening on the shotgun. "Stubborn old man. But stubbornness won't save you." The tension in the clearing grew thick, almost suffocating. As the attackers spread out, their weapons drawn, Henry's heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He had faced the brutality of the wilderness before, storms, predators, starvation, but this was different. This was a test of will. "Rusty," Henry whispered, glancing down at the hound. The dog's ears perked up, and he darted into the shadows, silently taking his place near the traps. A warning shot rang out, shattering the stillness. One of the attackers fired into the air, but Henry didn't flinch. With precise aim, he fired back, his shot striking the ground near one of the horses. The startled animal reared, throwing its rider to the ground. Chaos erupted. Blaze, sensing the urgency, broke free of his rope. The Mustang charged, his hooves thundering against the ground as he barreled toward the attackers. Henry's neck shot grazed Jackson's shoulder, drawing a curse as blood darkened his shirt. The remaining men faltered, their confidence wavering in the face of Blaze's wild ferocity and Henry's unerring aim. "Take him down!" Jackson roared, his voice laced with fury. But before his men could act, Blaze reared, his powerful hooves striking Jackson's shotgun, sending it clattering to the ground. Jackson stumbled back, fear etched into his face as Blaze loomed over him, the embodiment of untamed power. "Call them off!" Henry shouted, his rifle trained on the remaining men. "Or none of you will make it out of here." Jackson hesitated, glancing between Henry and Blaze. Finally, he raised his hands in surrender. "Fall back," he ordered, his voice begrudging. "It's not worth it." One by one, the attackers disappeared into the forest, swallowed by shadows. Henry lowered his rifle, his chest heaving. Blaze stood tall beside him, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his spirit unbroken. Together, they had triumphed once again, proving that their bond was a force that no adversary could break. Thomas Grayson leaned against the porch railing of his cabin, the rifle at his side glinting faintly in the first rays of dawn. In the clearing below, Blaze, the chestnut Mustang, stood tall and unyielding, his coat gleaming like fire in the morning light. Scars etched across his legs bore silent witness to battles fought and won. The Silverwood forest, usually restless, seemed to hold its breath, as if the wilderness itself had been subdued by what had transpired. The Mustang tossed his head, snorting softly, his wild eyes now calm and steady. Thomas approached him, resting a weathered hand against Blaze's neck. "You did it, boy," he murmured, his voice tinged with pride and quiet gratitude. "You showed them what you're made of." Blaze leaned into the touch, his strength unbroken despite the trials that had tested both him and Thomas. The men who had come to take Blaze, led by Jackson Wyatt, with Carter Reed and Wade Morgan at his side, were long gone. Their arrogance, shattered by the resolve of a man and his defiant Mustang, would keep them far from these woods for good. The wilderness, in its brutal and impartial way, had meted out justice that night. As the sun crept higher, the air felt lighter, as though the forest itself exhaled in relief. Blaze grazed in the clearing, his ears flicking toward the rustling leaves, alert, yet at ease. Thomas watched him, his heart swelling with admiration. The Mustang wasn't just a survivor. He was a force of nature, a testament to the indomitable spirit of the wild. The cabin had been Thomas's haven for years, a retreat from a world he had long since turned his back on. But Blaze had changed everything. The Mustang's arrival had brought new purpose to Thomas's solitary days, reminding him that even in the most isolated corners of the world, connection and hope could flourish. Walking to the edge of the clearing, Thomas met Blaze's steady gaze. There was no fear left in those dark eyes, only trust and understanding. He placed a hand on Blaze's neck, his voice soft. "You're something special, you know that? They tried to break you, but you didn't let them." Blaze snorted, a puff of warm air escaping into the crisp morning. Thomas chuckled, patting the Mustang's neck. "It's time," he said, a bittersweet resolve in his tone. "Time for you to go back where you belong." The next hours passed in quiet preparation. Thomas removed the makeshift halter from Blaze's neck, his hands lingering in the horse's mane one last time. The Mustang stood motionless, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Thomas opened the gate to the clearing, stepping aside to reveal the path leading into the untamed expanse of the forest. "You've earned it," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the ache tightening his chest. "Go on now. Run free." For a moment, Blaze hesitated, his gaze fixed on Thomas. In the silence, something unspoken passed between them, a bond unbroken by time or distance. Then, with a powerful leap, Blaze surged forward, his hooves pounding against the earth as he vanished into the depths of Silverwood Forest. Thomas stood watching, a faint smile playing on his lips despite the hollowness left by Blaze's departure. The clearing felt emptier now, but it wasn't the same as before. Blaze had left a mark, a reminder that even in solitude, there was room for connection, for something greater than oneself. Weeks turned into months. The wolves returned to the distant hills, the forest's rhythm settling into its familiar cadence. Thomas carried on with his quiet life in the cabin, though traces of Blaze lingered in every corner. Sometimes, as he walked through the woods or sat on the porch, he'd catch sight of a chestnut figure moving between the trees. Blaze was still out there, free and untamed, embodying everything the wilderness represented: strength, freedom, and the enduring spirit of life. Thomas found solace in that knowledge. The wilderness tested those who called it home, but it also rewarded the resilient, the steadfast. For Thomas and Blaze, theirs was a story not merely of survival, but of trust, defiance, and the profound bond forged between man and wild. As the sun dipped low, bathing the forest in golden hues, Thomas leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the tree line. Somewhere out there, Blaze was running free, a living testament to courage and resilience, and for Thomas, that was enough. Freedom, he thought, wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming what was meant to be yours. This is the tale of Blaze, the indomitable Mustang, and Thomas Grayson, the solitary man who found his purpose in standing by him. Together, they weathered the unforgiving trials of life and proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and connection can triumph. If their journey touched your heart, let it be a story you carry forward. Comment and share it, not just as a tale of survival, but as a testament to resilience, love, and the beauty of giving second chances. May it inspire us all to fight for what we hold dear, to protect the vulnerable, and to cherish the unspoken connections that make life extraordinary.